Hello students, in our last video we have discussed about the basic introduction of crisis intervention and essential requisites. So let's see what are the requisites we can use in crisis intervention. So something which is pleasant, interested or intonation of voice can be utilized as basic requisites. Okay, maintaining a good eye contact or posture and an appropriate social distance if in a face-to-face situation is very much important for a requisite. Next is remaining undistracted, open, honest, and sincere. The next one is basically asking open-ended questions to the person or to the victim. So, asking permission, never acting on assumptions. So when you are with a client, you might be you might be wanting to ask something, but still you have to take the permission to ask or something, because it's just through assumption we cannot deal with it. So checking out sensitive cross-cultural factors. If there's anything sensitive, cross-cultural factors which we should not say, then we need to cross-check. So you might be wondering what is a requisite, right? So requisite is anything that is necessary for an achievement or a specific end, or it is basically a particular regulation for a circumstance. So so this kind of requisites is so much important during crisis intervention. Good eye contact, pleasant voice, interested voice, confidence, honest and sincere, listening, asking very much open-ended questions, let the person speak, asking permission for asking something. Okay, so all these are very much important. Next, we will discuss about the phases of crisis intervention. So there are three phases of crisis intervention, that is immediate crisis intervention or psychological first aid. Next is the second phase and the third phase. So psychological first aid is very much important. That is when you are undergoing a crisis, the most important thing is how you deal with the immediate intervention, right? So that is psychological first aid. So you know about first aid, right? When you get into an accident, the first thing someone will apply you is first aid, okay, so that you can at least go to the doctor. So this similarly, before going to an actual counselor, there are psychological first aid workers who can at least mend you up with a basic first aid, which is psychological, and then you can go to second and third phase. So immediate crisis intervention, it involves establishing a rapport with the victim. For example, take a victim of an earthquake, okay, or a natural disaster, or a tornado, or what do you call a flood. So you will be relating to flood because you belong to us. You are living in a place called Assam, so you can relate to flood. So imagine a person who is affected with flood. So the victim is a flood affected. Okay, so it involves establishing a rapport with the victim. Okay, gather information for short-term assessment. What are the short-term assessments? You need to gather information for that. And service delivery. What are the delivery services you are going to provide? And averting a potential state of crisis. So if already the state of crisis has already happened to the victim, so averting any further damage. Immediate crisis intervention also includes caring for medical, physics, mental health, and personal needs of victim, and providing information to the victim about local resources. So I made a mistake here. Physics should be physical. Okay. So any kind of care, including medical care, physical care, or mental health care, or a personal care for the victim needs, or has to be provided with specific information and local resources for the victim. What happens in the second phase? The second phase of crisis intervention involves an assessment of the needs to determine the service and resources required by the victim in order to provide emotional support to the victim. So what are the various services and resources required by the victim for their emotional support that we need to understand and assess. The purpose of second phase is to determine how the crisis affects the victim's life, so that a plan for recovery can be developed, allowing the victim to begin towards the future. So the flood victim, we understood that flood victim, right? So in the second phase, we need to deal with how the crisis affects the victim's life. Is it happening every year, or this happened this year? So it's like that. How can we plan for recovery for the person so that it does not repeat in the future? Next is the third phase, that is recovery intervention helps victims re-stabilize their lives and becomes healthy again. So when we intervene, that means we need to stabilize the lives of the victim and make him healthy. It also involves helping the victim prevent further victimization from the criminal justice system or other agencies the victim may come into contact with and within aftermath of the victimization. So see, if you're a flood victim, you always, the government ask you a lot of questions, right? So to to prevent further victimization, because you become victimized even after that. So to prevent further victimization, the victim may the third phase is so much important for crisis intervention, so that even the social worker or the counselor can deal with the criminal justice system or any other agencies for that matter. So next is, what are the steps in crisis intervention? Let's see, there are 4 steps which are very much important for the process of crisis intervention. They are assessment, planning, therapeutic intervention, implementing techniques of intervention, then resolution of the crisis and anticipatory plan. Let's look at it one by one. The assessment process attempts to answer the questions such as what has happened, who is involved, what is the cause, and how serious is the problem. So the crisis worker or the case worker or the social worker or the medical and psychiatric worker, they will obviously assess the person by asking questions like this: what has happened first. That means you need to identify the problem, then who is involved, how did it happen, when did it happen, what is the cause of the problem, right? How serious is the problem, and uh, how victimized are you? Okay, so this kind of questions you can ask. The crisis worker also determines the following during the assessment process, like onset of the crisis, when did the crisis occur, right? And precipitation factors like including who, what, when, and where of the situation. Who was involved, what has happened, when did it happen, where did it happen. So all these are precipitating factors in an assessment. Next is planning, therapeutic intervention, and therapeutic intervention. Okay, what are planning? What are the therapeutic interventions needed for the client? So the person should be involved in the choice of alternative coping methods. So you, as we have already dealt with coping methods of stress, similarly we have to also deal with coping methods of crisis. Okay, so the choice of alternative coping methods can be assessed by the client. Can be assessed by the caseworker itself. The needs and reactions of the significant other must be considered. So any needs and reactions needed by the client is very much considered. Okay. Therapeutic intervention depends on pre-listing skills, the creativity and the flexibility of the crisis worker, and the rapidity of the person's response. So these and all therapeutic interventions are very much important. Okay, so that they can list the skills, creativity factors, and flexibility of the crisis worker. The crisis worker also helps the person to establish an intellectual understanding of the crisis by noting the relationship between the precipitating factors and the crisis. So what are the precipitating factors? Here they are, like who, what, when, and where. So this can be, so by the relationship between precipitating factors and the crisis, how it happened. So the crisis worker can establish an intellectual understanding of the overall problem or overall crisis. Next is the resolution and anticipatory planning. So during the evaluation phase or the step of crisis intervention, reassessment must occur to ascertain that the intervention is reducing tension and anxiety. So you need to make sure that whatever crisis intervention techniques you are doing, it should actually reduce the tension and anxiety of the client. Okay, if that is not happening, you have to go to the first phase again. So this reassessment is very much necessary. Assistance is given to formulate realistic plans for the future, and the person is given the opportunity to discuss how present experiences may help in coping with future crises. So when proper assistance is given to formulate realistic plans for the future, the person actually has the opportunity to present their experiences while coping with the present stress and how they will cope with the future stress. That is very much important. So these are some of the steps which can be done during crisis intervention. So in the next video, we will look out the conclusion part of this topic. Thank you so much for listening. Please stay tuned.